Wisdom is something I want to talk about. It's something that every Christian servant should ask for. And that's the focus of what I'd like to strive to cover today. Yes, we need wisdom, and this message will show us additional reasons why we're living in a very challenging time. Again, I call it the coming age of refinement. We're going to need to be closer to God than ever. We're going to need more practical wisdom than ever. We're going to face different challenges that demand that. Indeed, it is something that every Christian should ask for. It's something that can be accumulated through experience. Sometimes wisdom comes from perspective of just living. In fact, the admonition in the Bible is to honor and respect the hoary head, if it be found in the way of righteousness. Just getting older by itself does not guarantee that. But when there is wisdom, elderly should be honored. It is one reason we honor our senior citizens, and why we have that often at the feast when it's possible to coordinate it, to honor those that have labored among us, that have been doing so for a long, long time and have made a difference. So we need to grow in wisdom to meet the challenges of the future. There are examples throughout the Bible of people that have done that. And then there are examples of others that did not. One that failed to measure up was Rehoboam. Everybody probably remembers that Rehoboam was a new king after Solomon, his father, died, and he had the challenge of managing a very prosperous, dynamic kingdom. And so it was that with Rehoboam, he decided that he would get some counsel. And he went to his father's advisors, and he asked, what do you suggest that I do to manage this country? And they gave him an answer that he should have listened to and weighed very heavily. Anybody know what that is? Well, yeah, lower the taxes. And as the overall advice was, love these people, be kind to them, and don't oppress them. That's right, no tax increase in taxes. And that they will love you forever. They will be your servants for a long time. You will have peace and harmony. Then he went to the people that were not the hoary heads, the people that were part of his peer group, that were no more mature than he was. Or maybe I should rephrase it, as immature as he was. And they said, Rehoboam said, well, here's the advice of the other people. They said for me to be lenient, for me to be kind to these people. And his younger associate said, no. This is a time to be tough. This is the time to tax them and work them to the bone. He said, and so we announced that, quote, my father chastised with whips. Right, thank you. Good to be with an erudite group. My father chastised with whips, but I will chastise with scorpions. What a way to influence people and encourage and win over their affection. I'm being sarcastic there. That's tongue-in-cheek. That was a total disaster, and he almost paid with his life. He was chased out of the tribes of Israel to Judah, and he lost most of the country and the country's support. And people did want to kill the king, and that's the result of a lack of wisdom. Let's turn over to 1 Kings chapter 3 and read a very fascinating account of Solomon, who impressed God, and it's hard to impress God. He says, this man, while I looked, somebody that's of a contrite heart, known a humble spirit, Isaiah 66, verse 2. There are different statements like that show where God is moved by humility, by the willingness of people to serve and care for others. But we can't impress him with our knowledge, not our strength. We're but puny people. And nothing drives that point home more than if you're given a great responsibility and you realize, if God doesn't help me, I'm going to fall on my face. If God doesn't intervene, then be my senior partner. How far can I get in this society? In 1 Kings chapter 3, in verse 5, it says, that night God appeared unto Solomon in a dream, and God said, what would you like? Ask, and I will give it to you. I know people that would say, well, if he said I could have any wish, I would ask for 5 more wishes. I would just continue this priming of the pump. Some would ask for a lot of money, I suppose. But it was interesting. Solomon had enough wisdom to pray for more wisdom. And perhaps that was an instruction from his father, who was the wisest person in the world, who made some crazy mistakes, but still understood what it was like to be able to know what to say the right thing the right way at the right time. That's wisdom. You don't confuse wisdom with knowledge. Knowledge is the accumulation of facts, that's true. But wisdom is the ability to take those facts and that information and utilize it to help make right decisions. Now, you also need, beyond that, character to be able to implement them. Unfortunately, in King Solomon's case, as he became older, he drifted away from the true God and embraced the teachings of false gods. And so he was losing some of that wisdom, and he did not have the character to do what was right, even when he understood what was right. And as a consequence, and you read through the book of Ecclesiastes, he was demoralized, he was depressed, he was on a physical plane. It was like, I'll amass more things, I need to marry more women. 700 is not, 300 is not enough. He had concubines and wives. He had about 1,000 in all. What kind of relationship could that be with 1,000 people in that role? Not good. And then just building more and more public works and trying out madness and folly. And he writes about this experiment with life and trying to get more and more of the physical and how empty it was. And maybe he repented because at the end of Ecclesiastes he said, well, the main thing to do is to fear God and keep his commandments. But he didn't have to live an empty, painful life. And there are plenty of people in society that do. That think that amassing more is better, that more money, more things, more boats, more whatever. And that just leads to an empty, unhappy life. And that was Solomon. Now, in the beginning, he saw his father David, who was a wise man, with a good relationship with God. So he said something in response. When God says, what is it that you would like me to do for you? Verse 6, Solomon said, you showed faithful love to your servant, my father, David, because he was honest and true and faithful to you. And you have continued your faithful love to him today by giving him a son to sit on his throne. Now, O Lord my God, you have made me king instead of my father David, but I am like a little child who does not know his way around. This also is from the NLT version. But as I mentioned earlier, we can feel very naked. We can feel overwhelmed by different challenges. Church challenges, or is like, how do we collectively preach the gospel in an effective manner? Or how do I make decisions in my own life, in my own relationships with other important people in my life? Whatever it is, Solomon realized that he needed more wisdom than what he was utilizing. Verse 8, and here I am in the middle of your own chosen people, a nation so great and numerous, they cannot be counted. Give me an understanding heart so that I can govern your people well and know the difference between right and wrong. For who himself is able to govern so great a people as yours? If any of us were to inherit the White House, wouldn't that be our prayer? Wow. Help me to manage 320 people. It's like herding cats. They can't all be contained and moved in the same direction at the same time. Please help me to help them. How can I do that? How can I get cooperation? What can I say that'll overrule whatever misgivings or corruption or difficulties or obstinance that certain key people display that try to roadblock what I'm trying to accomplish. I think that any time any of us are thrusted into areas of responsibility, it drives us to our knees, and that's a good thing. And that we ask God to help us to think right, to make the right decisions and choices. And it's something that you and I need to pray about every day. Father in heaven, help me to have more wisdom. Unless you can convince me that, well, I don't really need it. I'm on top of my life. Everything's fine. I think we know better. But let's continue this. It's fascinating, this interchange of thoughts with God in heaven. I'm like a little child that doesn't know his way around. And give me an understanding heart. In verse 10, the Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for wisdom. So he replied, because you've asked for wisdom in governing my people with justice, and have not asked for a long life or wealth or the death of your enemies, I will give you what you asked for. And I will give you a wise and understanding heart, such as no one else has had or ever will have. And I will also give you what you did not ask for, riches, fame, a long life, and if you'll keep the commandments of of David, your father. Then Solomon woke up and realized that it had been a dream. He returned to Jerusalem and stood before the Ark of the Covenant, where he sacrificed burnt offerings and peace offerings. And then he invited all of his officials to a great banquet. Now, not that long thereafter, and God allowed this event to occur. Sometime later, 2 prostitutes came to the king to have an argument settled. Now, it doesn't say this in the Bible, but it would not surprise me if these 2 women went to a lower court first, and then they said, we can't handle this. And then they moved it up to the next level, moved it up to the Supreme Court. Well, they didn't have the Supreme Court there, but the King's Court. Now, it may not have played out exactly that way, but I can't imagine that for these 2 women that everybody would expect the case to go to the king. I would think that it would be attempted to be resolved at a lower level, and nobody could do that. And they couldn't sweep it under the rug because people would talk about it. I think that perhaps if there was a lower court, that the 2 women argued actually over a child, a baby. They both had given birth to babies, and one woman inadvertently crushed her child who was sleeping with her. And the other one, of course, was alive, and the 2 fought over the surviving child. So these 2 prostitutes came to the king to have this argument settled. Please, my lord, one of them began, this woman and I live in the same house. I gave birth to a baby when she was with me in the house. 3 days later, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There were only 2 of us in the house. God probably made sure of that. But her baby died during the night when she rolled over on it. Then she got up in the night and took my son from beside me while I was asleep. She laid her dead child in my arms and took mine to sleep beside her. And in the morning when I tried to nurse my son, he was dead. But when I looked more closely in the morning, I saw that it wasn't my son at all. Then the other woman interrupted. It certainly was your son, and that living child is mine. No, said the first woman, the living child is mine, and the dead one's yours. So they argued back and forth in front of the king. It's possible that they had argued back and forth in front of a local magistrate who said, I don't know the answer to this. I'm sending this up the line. This is above my pay grade. I don't know. And there's no witnesses, and I'm supposed to what, flip a coin? I don't know the answer to this. But God, I think, allowed this to happen so that his wisdom would come through and convince everybody in the kingdom that he really was wise enough to be their leader. So we can pick up the account in verse 23. King Solomon said, now let's get the facts straight. Both of you claim that the child is yours, and each says that the dead one belongs to the other. That's right, he's my baby. No, he's mine. He's mine. Back and forth, back and forth. All right, stop. Bring me a sword. And so a sword was brought to the king. Then he said, cut the child in two. Give half to one woman and half to the other. That's fair. Then the woman whose real mother was of the living child and who loved him very much cried out, no, 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 Lord, give her the child. Please do not kill him. And the other woman said, all right, he will neither be mine nor yours. Divide him between us. Then the king said, do not kill the child, but give him to the woman who wants him to live, for she is his mother. When all of Israel heard the king's decision, and you can bet everybody in that courtroom, as soon as they got home, Martha, guess what happened? Or come up with a Hebrew name, Mariah or somebody, or Sarah. Guess what happened? This impossible case came before the king, and nobody knew the answer to it. And the king was ready to divide the baby in half with the sword. And when we thought we were going to see blood and it was going to be horrible, then instantly everybody realized who the real mother was, because the real mother wanted to save him. So it was a very powerful testimony to the wisdom of Solomon under what would be exasperating circumstances for anybody else. And so, certain trials, like Charles Lindbergh, is the kidnapping of that baby was rocked the country. And then you've got the O.J. Simpson trial, which was a big national media story. But this was the equivalent back in the time of Solomon. It's more than a nice story. It is an example that speaks to us that we could be that Solomon. We could be asking God, I'm not satisfied with what wisdom I have to make the decision I have to at work and get along with people that maybe have rough edges. They're not easy to work with. When do I yield? When do I assert myself? How do I do it? It all has to be processed, and sometimes very quickly in our minds, and having that extra element of God's divine insight makes a difference. It makes a difference. It says in Proverbs, the righteous studies to answer. It's something you meditate on. When it says fear God, it doesn't mean, oh, God's going to get me, he's going to hurt me, I am afraid. It means see the greatness of God, the awesomeness that God displays. And when we do that, then we are moved to show profound respect to God and ask for his blessing so that we could be more like him. In Proverbs chapter 1, let's go over there and you'll see a very, very familiar scripture that we may not take for granted, we need not take for granted. Chapter 1 and verse 7. Fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge. When we are in awe of Christ, God's creation, of the animals, mountains, of color, of sound, of the entire universe, I think that we're humbled. We're overwhelmed sometimes, like David in Psalm 8. Who is man that you're mindful of him? Well, God is so great. He is so absolutely amazing. If we go over to Proverbs 9 in verse 10, we see the same thing. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Why would you read that here when we saw the exact same thing in Proverbs 1 and verse 7? Because when God repeats things, it's for major emphasis. He doesn't, for example, command us to keep the Sabbath just once. But there are over 40 different passages in the Bible that demonstrate that. If we go over to Psalm, go back to Psalm 111 and verse 10, it says the same thing. Fear of the Lord is the foundation of true wisdom, and all that obey his commandments will grow in wisdom. And there's no reason why we would not want to be able to do that. How many here have ever heard of Abdul Qasim? Abdul Qasim. Wow, two. He lived about 1,000 years ago. Excuse me. Got a dry throat. And so he loved knowledge. He loved to read. I won't say books because printing press wasn't invented. He had scrolls that he would read. He was a historian, and he loved to travel. And whenever he traveled, his library went with him. He had 117,000 scrolls, not books, but scrolls. And he transferred that anywhere he went because he liked to stop and read. And he was a wealthy merchant, could do that. So when he was traveling quite a bit, he had 400 camels, and they all were carrying scrolls. And they all had to walk in alphabetical order. So if he wanted to study zookeeping, he would go to the last camel. If he wanted to study something on gravity, or their understanding of it back then he would go sort of in the middle, or the front middle of the pack, and be able to fetch that. So he loved knowledge, and he never tired of learning more. And all the camels knew who led and who was to follow. This was brought out in a Reader's Digest story in 1981. He was very knowledgeable, but he was not necessarily wise. Remember, utilizing the material and putting it together is where wisdom comes into play. Now, I talk about the age of refinement. Now, we're seeing very unusual activity happen in this country. The things that none of us would have dreamed that would have happened even 2 years ago. Whether we're talking about election results, or about COVID-19, or about national debt and billions or trillions of dollars printed up, let me put it that way, printed up and distributed to Americans across the country. And who knows what the future will be. But I think that we laughingly say that the only thing normal about the last year was whatever was abnormal. And we'll probably see more of that in the time to come. There is a prophecy that talks about the beginning of sorrows over in Matthew 24. For us to negotiate through all of that, to be able to be on the right side of different issues, to be able to have God's inspiration and His guidance, we have to get closer to God. Then we have to, not that we've been doing anything wrong, but it's time to take our relationship with God to the next level. We really have to, because it's not just business as usual in the world, as I think we look around and understand. As we consider what's happened in the last year, we should just value life, how precious it is, how wonderful that God gives us yet another day to live, or another week, and what are we doing with that, and how do we align with Him? Well, asking for God's wisdom enables us to be blessed. David said in Psalm 119 that his way was a lamp unto his feet, a light unto his path, and there should be every reason to expect that in our own cases. We could go read 1 Kings 3 and pray to God, look, you gave wisdom to Solomon. We want it as well. We have maybe even more reason to have it because you've called us to do an end-time work. How do you reach a population, a society, with a message that in some cases is not that attractive? What? Me? Be unselfish? What? Me? Contribute to God and His church? What? Me? Change my ways? God expects that from us. And He will not expect us to do it without His help. He gives us what we need, but we have to make the effort. One of the future challenges, there could be an erosion of religious opportunity in this country. It's even much more that way in other nations. Just recently in Germany, we had, and it was a prayer request that was mentioned for a girl who wanted to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it had to go to a court. And the court said, no, that's out, impossible. We don't make those concessions for anybody or any minority. So she appealed to the appellate court, and they said after much deliberation, well, the first and the last day, that looks religious. The rest of it, we don't think you can do that. So she ended up dropping, I think she dropped out of her educational curriculum. I don't know the exact way that played out, but she got resistance from the government. In the past, in this country, we have been most fortunate that we've been able to have the Supreme Court support our Sabbatarian beliefs. But we can't assume that that's going to be that way. There are some people that have a history of, in American government, at different locations or echelons of it, that are very negative toward religion. And so we may have to, or may require more wisdom and be more vocal and make presentations in front of other people in order to be able to keep these holy days. You know, that will set us apart. How things play out specifically, I can't tell you, but I just know that we're living at a time where Satan knows he has a short time left, and we see different events going on, and you can see the writing on the wall, really. I'm glad that we covered the detail of Bible prophecy because, you know, it's time to go on to other things like wisdom and the history of the church, and know where we fit in and what can we learn from our spiritual ancestors. And then there'll be other things to do. It's a case of like the 2-minute offense in football. Okay, we've got a certain amount of time. What can we get done? You know, this is a time for a sense of urgency. We do not set dates. There might be a reprieve yet, but we see an intensification, or have, of events that are not always favorable to the church. And we need to be wise and know how to deal with that. There are so many proverbs that can help us. A soft answer, for example, turns away wrath. A good thing to remember in case we get into animated discussion with somebody that wants to take issue with what we believe. Says another proverb, a fool is wise. When he is silent, is counted as one of the wise. There might be a time when we don't know the answer, and it's best not to give an answer. Just because somebody, even from the press, sticks a microphone in front of you and says, explain yourself, you don't have to. Silence may be a very loud statement on occasion. When do you do it? When do you not? You ask for God's help. God can give us the wisdom. I can remember the dynamic age of 21. We had an activity up in New Hampshire that I attended. It was a car rally. It was a very successful event. But we had an obstacle course that we set up on the school parking lot. It was pretty much vacant. And after it was over, one man, a neighbor, came out, crossed the street, got in my face, screaming bloody murder at me, and saying, how dare you have this activity, and on and on, and he's just verbally swinging at me in a sense. And I didn't know what to think. This guy's a hothead. He's out of control. He's screaming. I'm shocked the neighbors aren't here. Get the dogs barking, in the neighborhood. And I thought, what do I say? I'm 21. I'm not a hoary head. And at that time I thought, a thought came to me. A soft answer turns away wrath. Proverbs, 15? A soft answer turns away wrath. So while he's going and thundering, you can't be doing this on my property. It's school's property, really. But ram. I said in a very quiet voice, I said, well, what do you suggest? And here he was, and then I disarmed him, and he didn't know what to do. It was like he went from to meow. And, life and death is in the power of the tongue. I might have saved my life. And so he didn't know what to do. And then he stews about and grumbles, well, we'll do something. So I left, and then I drove back from a distance. About a half an hour later, he had the police out there, and they're walking around this empty parking lot like, what are we, chasing the wind here? So you never know, and that wasn't an earth-shattering accomplishment. We didn't change the tide of history with that example, but it was an experience, and maybe my first, where I was facing something and I wasn't quite sure how to handle it, and there was nobody else to consult and no time to do so. So I said, what do you suggest? And that worked. There are a lot of proverbs that talk about how to identify problems from far away, or certain people to avoid, and certain people to get with. And if you want to be wise, walk with the wise. Or if you're isolated, get books that were written by wise people that give insight into how to deal with other people. And then use it for a good purpose. It was funny that Mr. Armstrong was talking back before he was in the church. He was trying to work at sell advertising in this one place in Indiana, and they were at a crossroads. Some of the visionaries of the town decided that if they could build this major highway that would run from Canada down to Mexico, and would go right through their state, that it would bring so much traffic and commerce, and it would be a boon to the local economy. And yet almost all the farmers were against it. We're not letting any people dictate to us how we manage our community and our farmland, and we're not going to have any highway through here. So what Mr. Armstrong did was to try to change public opinion. He knew it was very adamant against it. It was like everybody was against it. So he went to a few farmers that he convinced would benefit from having this highway built. And once they understood the whole story, they were excited about it. But he didn't have time to contact everybody in the farming industry, because if they didn't say yes to this, then the whole highway project, would go to other states and other places. And as a race against time, he remembered he could move more people through emotion than he could through logic. Logic convinces, but emotion moves. So he got the four farmers to agree, when they had the state fair or whatever, to say something in favor of the proposal. And so it was that he got somebody to explain at the fair, when they had the big meeting and all the farmers and everybody around was there. They said, we have an opportunity, one person said, we have an opportunity to open up commerce to our community. If we just approve this highway, and he talked about the virtues for the next 10 minutes, and he was animated. And then farmer number one that wanted it, on cue, as agreed to earlier, says, I want in on that. I want to sign the petition. And then a second one from another place, I want to sign that. And then the third says, back off, let me in there. I got to get my name on it. And then the fourth says, I want in on it. Come on, you guys. I think all of us want in on it. And they all, like sheep, went and lined up, and they all signed it, and that highway, the Dixie Highway, was constructed. So I think it's Route 33 or 31, something like that. Still there today, 100 years later almost. But it was fascinating that people were manipulated by emotion. Now, this message is not designed to inspire manipulation of anybody or anything, but just to show that, once again, when you understand human nature, sometimes it gives you insight as to how you interface with it. How do I respond? It's important for us to have an answer for every man. And that comes from Bible study, from being close to God. And again, we live in the challenging times ahead. We live in, when it says, let's go over to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10. There comes a time when we will be a household name, when the message that we carry, whether it's accepted or rejected, people will know that it does exist. I'm optimistic that people can happily listen and that many will want to make course corrections in their lives. I'm talking about the general populace. And if we support it, that we will be even more convicted than ever to support God's way of life. In chapter 10 and verse 16, look, he says, and Christ's now speaking to his disciples, but there's an end-time application. I am sending you out as sheep among wolves, so be as shrewd as snakes, or wise as snakes and harmless as doves. But beware, you will be handed over to the courts, will be flogged with whips in synagogues. Some will stand trial before governors and kings because you are my followers. That is part of the age of refinement. And this will be your opportunity to tell the rulers and other believers about me. When you are arrested, don't worry about how to respond or what to say. God will give you the right words at that time. They probably will be more significant than, what do you suggest? Something much deeper than that. And it says, for it will not be you who is speaking, but it will be the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. But we have to do our part. Faith and works go together. We have to be studying the Bible. We have to study examples of wisdom. When we do that, we're able to more easily draw on right thoughts to be able to give the appropriate answers. Now, that may seem intimidating. It's also true that for an important segment of God's church, that God will place a number of brethren in a place of safety. Where that is, I don't know. When, I don't know. Who goes, I don't know. The just shall live by faith. The main thing is, in Matthew 24 and verse 14, is the gospel shall go forth into all the world, to all nations. And then the end of the age shall come. So, a lot is at stake. It's exciting when people that are maybe with ordinary background are brought together, molded into a church, an army, a spiritual army, and are able and in a position to reach more people with a positive message. Now, that's something we should be optimistic about, that God can work with us mightily, use us as instruments. And many people will be positive examples and will do great exploits in the end time, spiritually, and a fair number will probably be protected, as it mentions in Revelation 3 and verse 10 and numerous other places. And we've covered that in past Bible studies. But our main objective is to please God and to become more refined. That makes us more effective, more helpful to Him, and we have a short amount of time to do that. Our media efforts are very good. I find it interesting that the income of the church right now has been remarkably good in spite of what's happened. That's not accidental. I can't believe that that's accidental. It means that we're under budget last year, very much so because of COVID-19. And we're forced to come up with alternate ways to have, Zoom Bible studies or Zoom meetings among personnel at the home office. So that places us under budget, which means that somewhere, somehow, with great wisdom, God can steer us to know where to use that money for the future. Maybe we need to be on additional television stations. I don't know. I know that the council seems to be in total harmony on how things are going, and it comes at a perfect time. And so, with crisis, as we see in the society, there's always opportunity that's built inside that. And that opportunity can come to us in a unique way. I can theorize what else could happen as far as the preaching of the gospel, but I don't know for sure. I just know that the just live by faith, and that if we ask for God's help, he'll give it to us. In Ezekiel chapter 33 is one of the interesting prophecies about doing an end-time work. And perhaps, not perhaps, I have to believe, even though it's not spelled out that way, that there is a bedrock of wisdom that underlies Ezekiel 33. If you'll turn over there, we'll read about the role of the watchman. Part of announcing the good news of the kingdom of God is to explain that it's going to replace what we see around us, that life is incomplete without God in it. In chapter 33 of Ezekiel, in verse 10, Son of man, give the people of Israel this message. You are saying, our sins are heavy upon us. We are wasting away. How can we survive? At least some people will accept this understanding that the reason that there are national problems and calamities is because the people have been wayward instead of close to God. And so there is sin that is heavy upon us. Verse 11, as surely as I live, says the sovereign Lord, I take no pleasure in the death of wicked people. I only want them to turn from their wicked ways so they can live. Turn, repent of your wickedness. O people of Israel, why should you die? You know, an optimistic person is going to say that because the message is if you change and repent, you can be spared the brunt of the tribulation. You can be blessed. You can have a future. Verse 12, Son of man, give your people this message. The righteous behavior of righteous people will not save them if they turn to sin, nor will the wicked behavior of wicked people destroy them if they repent and turn from their sins. And it's with this in mind that God does talk about a place of protection or in the future. Verse 13, when I tell the righteous people that they will live, but then they sin, expecting the past righteousness to save them, then none of their righteous acts will be remembered. I will destroy them for their sins. And suppose I tell some wicked people that they will surely die, but then they turn from their sins and do what is right. For instance, they might give back a debtor's security, return what they have stolen, or obey my life-giving laws, no longer doing what is evil. If they do this, then they shall surely live and not die. None of their past sins shall be brought up again, for they have done that which is just and right. That is cause for great optimism. The challenges of the future don't establish futility. They establish an opportunity to be linked with God and to be spared and protected. Verse 17, your people are saying the Lord isn't doing that which was right. Or they'll say he's unfair, the ways of the Lord are not equal. There's a parallel account in Ezekiel 18 that ties right into this. But it is they who are not doing what is right. For again, I say, verse 18, when righteous people turn away from their righteous behavior to turn to evil, they will die. But if wicked people turn from their wickedness and do that which is right and just, they will live. And how much more us that are aware of God's will and do keep the Sabbath and do want to live according to his blessings and his way of life. So I will move on to the end of the chapter. And interesting, the description of the end time work that we're doing is described here, verse 30. Son of man, your people talk about you in their houses and whisper about you at the doors. Wow, did you hear the Beyond Today program? Did you hear what they said today? Wow, that was really hard hitting. That was good. Or I'm not sure about that. But did you hear it? People will start to exchange thoughts. I really believe that indications from Ezekiel 33 and elsewhere, Matthew 24, suggest that we will become a household name. People will know who we are and what we represent. And that's nothing to be feared. When I first came into the church, to be hearing something like that, I would think would be intimidating. But you see, we never are supposed to do this work on our own. You never want to give a sermon on your own. You never want to do anything on your own. When God is the one that moves the needle, that makes things happen, that unlocks doors or minds, these are essential. So it says here, this is the initial impact of our efforts as we become much more established. They say to each other, "Come on, let us go hear the prophet tell us what the Lord is saying." Yeah, let's go listen to the message. It's compelling. It's attractive. It makes sense. It's clear. So my people come pretending to be sincere and sit before you in front of their TV sets or maybe in a public Bible lecture, whatever it is. They listen to your words, but they have no intention of doing what you say. Maybe they're looking for an easier way. It's like W.C. Fields. I couldn't believe it. He's on his deathbed and he suddenly, finally, asks for a Bible. And they say, "Why are you asking for a Bible now?" And he says, "I'm looking for loopholes. You know, had a shady past. I need to get right with my Creator before it's all over." That would be a very shallow attempt at trying to obey God. But they listen anyway, and the selfish reason for us to do this is, well, then the blood isn't on our head. But the right view of trying to present a message of hope and warning is to help them to have a future spiritually. So they they listen to the words, they have no intention of doing what you say, or they might if it's easy enough. Their mouths are full of lustful words. I think the King James probably says it better, but they might even be laudatory, and yet they are not. Verse 32, you are very entertaining to them, like someone who loves to sing songs with a beautiful voice or plays fine music or an instrument. They hear what you say, but they do not act on it. I'll never forget when I first came into the church, we had this old codger up there in New Hampshire, and he would say with his New England twang, "Oh man, did you done hear what Governor Ted said? Oh yeah." He went after them hippies. He chewed them up one side and down the other. Oh man, I loved it. Sock it to him, sock it to him. What? You saying I have to change and repent and be? Oh, come on, let's sock it to these people. They're not of us. But he missed the mark. He didn't realize that he was a people, that he was a member. He had to change. He had to make adjustments like the rest of us, go through Passover like the rest of us. But he didn't understand that. And so that's as far as he went spiritually. And then he died. I hope that he wasn't converted. I hope that he has a real future later on. Instead of gloating over the mistakes of other people or looking down on other people. So we live in an age of refinement. That's coming. We need more of a connection with God, not less. And I'm sure that everybody agrees. It says at the very, very end of Ezekiel 33, but when all the terrible things happen, the great tribulation, events leading up to it, as they certainly will, then they will know that a prophet has been among them. And maybe they'll conclude, wow, these people were good representatives, and they fulfilled what they promised God that they would be willing to do. And God would want to bless them and protect them for that. Especially when there are, 7 billion people on this planet or more, and many of them don't know who God is, and many that give lip service don't really want to obey him. Out of all of that, and God sees everything, knows the number of hairs on everybody's head. Whenever a sparrow falls to the earth, he knows that too. And then when he looks and finds a servant here and there, and people in this congregation, he says, wow, look at that. They actually are trying to change, and they have changed, and they're doing their best to connect with the society around them and provide. He said, that's noteworthy. I will answer them. Because they did not ask for long life or riches or whatever, I will definitely take care of them. maybe give them some of these other things on the way. They are refined. They are a blessing. And refinement is another theme that you find through the Bible. And it's interesting, I'll need to wrap this up, but when you study about the potter, and Isaiah talks a great deal about the potter in other places, and under heat, under refinement, that there is a change. And then when you create, let's say, a pot of silver, for example, and you refine the dross and you get rid of that, and you have a beautiful object that's pure at the end, that's what God wants to do with his people. And it's interesting, as others have brought out, if you ask the silversmith, okay, you've built this beautiful pot, how do you know when you're done? He says you're done with it when you can look and see your reflection in that pot of silver. And God, being the master potter, when he can see his face in us, then he knows that we are a complete creation. But that refinement goes on in the next few years. It's nothing to fear if we're optimistic. Optimism comes from being close to God and asking for God's help. And God will enable us to do things that we may never have even thought possible. But as long as we give him credit, then that's the ultimate blessing. So let's be thankful that there is such a medium as wisdom. We want to cash in on that. We should want to ask for more of that all the time. Study examples of others. Study examples of people that were wise, that made good decisions. Because when God blesses us, he wants us to access the experiences and the studies that we've made on this subject. So let's strive to do that and please God the way Solomon did when he asked for not the riches and the silver and the gold, but he asked to have an understanding heart. Let's strive to have and ask for God's wisdom as never before.